And this is Velazquez from 52 yards. Waning seconds of the first half. Velazquez from 52 is good. And Boise State with a brilliantly executed clock drive to put three more on the board. And with a fist pump from Brian Hartson, a 17-0 lead at the half.
Welcome, Bronco Nation, to the third part of the Boise State 2023 preview series. We've had the offensive preview with Grant Hedrick. We've had the defensive preview with Winston Venable. And now I'm super excited to be wrapping up this three-part series with a preview looking at the special teams with Joel Velazquez on today. Of course, Joel Velazquez doesn't need much of an introduction as he was recently on the team. But for anybody who may need a quick update of what he did at Boise State, he was a Boise State punter from 2016 to 2021. He averaged 43.1 yards and 51 punts in 2021 with a long of 62. He notched a 52-yard field goal in 2019 versus UNLV, which, by the way, was the first 50-yard field goal for Boise State since Tyler Rausa did that in 2015 versus UVA. I actually messaged Tyler Rausa right after you made that kick, and I was like, hey, I can't believe it, another 50-yarder. And he's like, yeah, let's go. And then that remains the longest field goal by a Boise State kicker since Kyle Brotzman made one in 2009. So in the modern era of Boise State football, post-2010, Joel Velazquez, you hold the record for longest field goal by Boise State kicker. And your 2021 average was sixth highest all-time for Boise State, your overall punting average. And you had a career long of 71 yards. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited for the upcoming season.
Well, we're going to get off the start here. We're going to do a quick Q&A, just talk a little bit about your time at Boise State and some of your unique perspective there. And then we're going to look at a 2021 statistical review of the Boise State special teams. 2022 statistical review of the Boise State special teams. Then we'll move into looking at Tyler Rausa. Usually this section would be the newcomers to Boise State from a special teams perspective, but there aren't really any newcomers recruits, but there is a newcomer to the coaching staff. Tyler Rausa, former guest on this channel, is a special teams coach for Boise State. So we'll talk about what his move to the coaching staff means to the Boise State special teams. We'll look at the kicking game, the punting game, the coverage and return game, and we'll look at three keys to the season for the Boise State special teams and end with an overall predictions for the Boise State special teams. So let's jump right into the Q&A section here. So first question, and a pretty easy one right off the bat, is just what brought you to Boise State? Talk a little bit about what that recruiting process was like and why you chose to come kick for the Broncos or punt for the Broncos.
Yep. So biggest thing that brought me to Boise State was just the culture and the family atmosphere. Came on a visit with my mom and my sister, and just the coaching staff was super welcoming. And then in addition to that was all the people in Boise are super friendly. So when we were out at restaurants, it was just a great place to be.
Did you feel like when you were being recruited for Boise State from a special team side of, we know how hard Boise State goes after, the big key guys, the running backs, wide receivers, what's going on with Gatlin Bear right now. But did you feel like special teams was a priority for Boise State, that you were getting that red carpet treatment even as a special teams player?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Boise State, the reason we've been successful for so long is we do the little things right. And part of that is treating special teams and taking it seriously. We treat offense, special teams, defense the same. It's the three facets of the game, and you have to be spot on in all of them to win games at a consistent rate. And so we do that at Boise State for sure.
Part of being a punter or a kicker for Boise State, and you did both while you were there, primarily focusing on punting, but is coming in for those key moments. It's one of the toughest positions in the game because everybody is focused on those one key point. It's not like there's ever a point where a punter comes in and it's not an important play. There's always a time that it's go time. You got to play the field position battle. Is at a key point. Usually the offense has sputtered out, and you now need to get the defense some good starting position. How do you prepare for those key moments, which is just your whole career? How do you prepare before and in game for those key moments when you're called on to go out and play?
For sure. So before the game just comes down to visualization, the night before the game and just throughout practice, putting yourself in those mental situations and getting those reps mentally, and then also in practice going through them physically with the right headspace. And then in game, it just comes down to at least for me, once you're in the game, you're kind of just flowing. You're in the groove, you're doing your practice kicks in the net, and then you're just kind of going and getting after it, really. It feels pretty smooth and comfortable. I mean, sometimes there's some ups and downs. Some things don't go your way, and you just gotta have a short-term memory on those ones and then come back for the next one.
Your senior year at Boise State, 2021, like we talked about, one of your best years at Boise State, but it was also an interesting year for other reasons. That was the coaching transition year. You know, we had Brian Harsin left, Andy Avalos came in. That was his first year. What was that coaching transition like? What was it like for the team? What was it like for you? What was your perception of how that coaching transition went for Boise State?
Yeah, I think it went pretty smooth overall. Obviously, a lot of the guys on the team had been familiar with Coach Avalos from when he was the DC and then left over to Oregon. So there was, a welcome face in Coach Avalos. It's obviously tough leaving, or a head coach leaving that you've been with for a while. And so that's obviously never fun. It was a bummer, but when you get Coach Avalos coming in, another Bronco, at least, you're coming from one guy who's a former Bronco that truly cares about the program to another guy who's a former Bronco and cares about the program. So that made it, I'd say, an easier transition for us.
Jonah Dalmez came to Boise State while you were still there. What were your impressions of him? I mean, he's gotten quite a rapport at Boise State. He has a chance to potentially seal himself in as the greatest kicker all time for Boise State. He's gotten some monikers like the Iceman Dalmez because he can't be iced. But what were your impressions of him when he was coming in as a fresh-faced, player for this team? Did he openly talk about his goals and his ambitions? What was your overall impressions of John Dalmez?
Yeah, Jonah, biggest thing coming out was just he was super positive, had just a good attitude around him, brought good energy. And then in addition to that, just his leg was powerful and accurate. I was impressed by that just right off the rip. And he was just hungry to learn, asked a lot of questions, and was just constantly trying to improve. So I was really impressed with just his overall attitude towards kicking and how much he really enjoyed being out there kicking the ball.
Did you think he was going to have this level of success? Because he's not just gone out and done well. He's potentially got a chance to seal himself as one of the greatest all time to do it at Boise State. Did you have those impressions early on that was where his trajectory was?
Yeah, to be honest, the first time I saw him kick, I don't know if he missed at all or just barely. So he was spot on and had the leg strength, which sometimes is the part that might be lacking at times. People have accuracy, but he had a nice combination of both. And so I was really impressed right off the rip and thought he could definitely move on to do great things. And that has been the case thus far.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what Boise State Special Teams was able to do last season and then we'll move into talking about what they're able to achieve this next upcoming year. So looking at Boise State's 2022 statistical review, looking at the kicking perspective, of course, Jonah Dalmez, another incredible year for him. Technically, it was a down year for him according to his standards. He ended up missing 4 kicks, but he made 23 out of 27. He had an 85.2% completion percent or kicking percentage, long of 51. Like I said, his first year he missed 1, his second year he missed 2, last year he missed 4, but that is still an incredible percentage overall, and he had a great year. Punting was a little bit of an adventure at the beginning. James Ferguson, the Australian, coming in, so a little bit of a different perspective. It took him a little while to adjust up there in the front, but the back end of the game was very strong. 63 punts overall. That's the 9th most in a single season for Boise State all time. 41.8 yard average, long of 61. He had 21 kicks land inside the 20, only 4 touchbacks, and he had net punting average overall of 36.9. Will Ferrin was also a little bit in the mix there, but James Ferguson ended up being able to secure himself as the primary punter for Boise State. He's now the only punter for the Boise State roster right now. As far as blocks go, there were still some blocks out there. It wasn't the block fest that 2021 was. Unit blocked 7 overall, but there was still some decent production there. Punt, 2 blocked kicks. The return game and the punt and the return defense, though, however, is where Boise State wasn't necessarily up to its usual standards in special teams overall. For the returning overall, they averaged 6.56 yards for punt returns, 80th overall in the FBS. That was a drop off from 15.5 yards, which was number 1 in Mountain West in 2021, when, of course, you had Khalil Shakir out there doing what he did so great. And his kick return overall was 22.52 yards, not quite as bad. That was 24th overall, number 1 in the Mountain West. So pretty decent in the kick return game, but the punt return game was not strong. But for returning punts, you primarily had Cobbs, Caples, and Holani all out there returning punts. Cobbs averaged 6.8 yards, Caples averaged 6 yards, and Holani averaged 7.5. A little bit surprising to see your number 1 running back out there returning punts, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit later on. But that was an option for Boise State, and they utilized it before Caples kind of took over the lead. For the kick return game, it was primarily Cobbs at the beginning, and then Wright ended up taking taking over. And then right at the end of the season, we saw Dudley. Wright and Dudley had pretty good success, with Wright averaging 22.1 yards, and Dudley actually on 7 kick returns averaging 28.4. So he was a little bit of a rising star for the kick return game there towards the end of the year. Maybe we'll get to see some more of that this season. And then as far as return defense, this is really where it was not great for Boise State. Impacted the Mountain West Championship game for sure, but punt returns, they allowed 3 touchdowns. They averaged 18.7 yards, which was worst in the entire FBS. And they also on kick returns, they allowed a touchdown and a 21.54 yard average, which was 89th overall in the country. So when you look back on 2022 for Boise State, when you looked at the statistics overall, and of course from your own perspective watching the games, what was it you saw? What was it that stood out to you for Boise State in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, there was some ups and downs for sure. I think part of it, you got some new players in there that kind of got to find their groove and develop as players overall in college football. So I think you could chalk some of that up there. Hopefully they have a better year this year. But there's definitely room for improvement, and we got good guys out there on the field that can get it done overall.
Was there anybody that stood out to you in the special teams? You know, we'll talk a little bit about them later when we talk specifics here, but were you surprised by the performance of anyone specifically in 2022 from a special teams perspective?
Not necessarily surprised. I know Mason was slinging some good snaps. I'd obviously worked with him before, so I knew he had some good snaps, and I was, impressed and proud of the way he performed in his first year as far as snapping the ball. Was great. So that was pretty cool to see him kind of take on that role. And then it was fun to watch a new punter in there and kind of bringing this new rugby scheme and seeing how that panned out. Obviously, like you mentioned, kind of started out a little rough, started to get better the second half of the season. So hopefully, James can carry that momentum forward into this season for sure.
Well, looking at 2023, there's a lot of questions that have to be answered, and we'll look at some of them here in this video. Will be the impact of adding Tyler Rouse to the staff? Can Jonah Dalmas secure his spot as the best kicker in Boise State history? Will we get an electric returner? We've had historically for Boise State, you've always had that electric, conference shattering returner. Avery Williams and Khalil Shakir. Boise State's always had someone that stepped up and done great. And last year we didn't necessarily see that. That's going to be a big question. Can someone step up this year? And then can the punting game develop true consistency throughout? Can the end of what we saw last year carry forward into this year? And of course, a bunch of other questions we'll all answer in this video. But looking right now at Tyler Rouse, addition to the coaching staff. He has been a recent hire for Boise State, but he has actually spent quite a bit of time at Boise State. It's where he was coming and he was training when he wasn't playing in the different professional football startup leagues. So the first question I have for you is, what impact do you think the coaching staff has on a special team player's performance? I've asked this question when Ryan Dinwiddie was on the channel. We were talking about quarterbacks, but when you're talking about a special teamer, how much of it is nature and how much of it is nurture? How much of an impact does bringing in a kicker with the experience of Tyler Rouse have on the individual performance of a kicker like Jonah Dalmas?
For sure. I think it's a little bit of both. Having Ross there, I think, will be super beneficial in just having a coach that's going to know the right ways to find tweaks here and there and improve the players' confidence through the way they prepare. Obviously, Ross has been training for playing at a bunch of different levels and organizations, and he's been training for a long time and finding ways that he can keep improving over that span of time. And so I think he brings all that to the table, as well as somebody that sat in literal Boise State football seats, the same seats that these guys are now in. Will be super relatable and, someone that you can count on, and having him there all the time will be incredible for that unit, I think.
Now, like I said, Rouse, a recent hire for Boise State, but he's spent quite a bit of time around the university while you were there yourself. What was his presence like there when he was just kind of coming out as a former alumni, kicking on the field? Was he passing down wisdom, kind of unofficially helping out? Like, what was his presence like at Boise State?
Yeah, so I love my time with Rosso. We're still buddies now, watch UFC fights together and whatnot. But yeah, we would kick, in the summer together and get working. He'd help me out. He'd go train, with certain coaches, and he'd give me some, tidbits of information here and there. So it's just awesome to have him around. I think having him on the coaching staff will be able to help him identify kind of the player's strengths and their like where they feel comfortable as specialists, what their strengths are. And then trying to help the coaching staff set up the schemes, to aid in that coming to fruition and being able to take advantage of those strengths.
Well, I'm super excited about this addition to the coaching staff. I've been a big fan of Tyler Rousa since when he was at Boise State, and then I fortunately got the opportunity to be able to connect with him after his playing time there and develop a friendship. And he's been on this channel several times. So big fans of Tyler Rousa on this channel, and we're very excited to see what he can do at Boise State. It's going to be a great combination with Jonah Dalmas and Tyler Rousa, two of the greatest to do it at Boise State, coming together as a team and plodding that course forward to making Dalmas one of the greatest all time for Boise State. And that leads us perfectly then into discussing the first element of the 2023 season, which is the kicking game. So we'll lead off right there with the kicking game. Where do you think Dalmas ranks among Boise State kickers? He's number one in field goal percentage, 89% overall. And he's number two in field goals made with 56. Kyle Brossman with 67. So he'd only need 12 made field goals to be able to surpass Kyle Brossman's record. He's had a lot of great contributions to the game. Last year, there was about 4 games where you go back and you say the kicking was key to that, including the bowl game versus North Texas. But he's never had a true moment where he has to line up the kick in overtime and win it. So he's never had that true, you look back and that was that intense moment where you won the game right there. So when you look at Jonah Dalmas, where do you think right now he ranks among Boise State kickers? Do you think he is the greatest right now, or does he need to do something this year to be able to cement his title?
I mean, he's definitely up there. Everyone has their different strengths, and Brodsman, I think, doing all 3 things was super cool and kind of separates himself for that reason. But I mean, Jonah's up there top 3 for sure, and you can debate him from there.
Right. Absolutely. I 100% agree. I was super impressed when he came in his first year. I mean, we were really lucky to get 2 kickers that were so accurate back-to-back with sacks, and then moving right then into Dalmas. So be able to have 2 kickers like that back-to-back, and what he's done at Boise State has been so impressive. He has made it a stated goal. He wants to be one of the greatest all time for Boise State, and I think he's definitely going to be in that conversation. But you think that he can have a perfect year? He's been close. His first year, he was close. His second year, he made a lot more kicks, and he was still close. Last year, a little bit off. Do you think that perfect year is in him? It's such a hard goal, and it's not necessarily one that makes a difference either way, but do you think that's a potential for him?
Yeah, I certainly think so. He's capable, and the guys he has around him are capable of helping him get there for sure. It just comes down to the preparation and the execution when, the moment comes. And he does such a great job of just wanting to help the team be successful. And I think that's what allows him to kind of stay level-headed and just keep executing at this level. So he's got it in him, I think, for sure.
Do you think there's any chance that he's going to break your record this year? From what you've seen of his leg strength and maybe situationally for the team this season, do you think he has a chance to go out there and put a 52-yard field goal or more out on the field this season?
Yeah, he's definitely got it in the bag. With those long field goals, the thing that comes up is just the situation, like you mentioned. There was a couple of times where it was looking like I might be able to get a 60-yard or 61-yard or something like that. And then, someone gets tackled for loss or a flag comes out or just something changes or we get the first down and now we're, moving up the field and now I'm not out there anymore. So it really just comes down to the situations. I was with the team for 6 seasons, playing for 5 and only had limited chances. So those long field goals are far and few between, but situation comes up, he's ready for it. I know that.
He has one more year for Boise State if he wanted to use it. There's a lot of talk about him being able to go pro. Do you see that in his future professional career down the road? And then also, do you think there's any chance that he does stick around for one more year?
Yeah, I mean, I think he can definitely play at the next level, and his statistics back that up for sure. So just how this year goes and what he feels best for him, I think that makes sense. And then if he wants to stick around another year, Boise State is a great place to stick around for another year. It's surrounded with great people that truly want to improve and just be a part of something special. That's a big reason why, I took advantage of that COVID year. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he took another year and took advantage of it, keeps performing at the same level or even better. I don't think that's going to, hurt him NFL wise at all. So I don't see anything changing much for him either way.
Were you surprised at all, with the considerations that this could potentially be his last year and he has that potential down the road? Were you surprised at all that Boise State didn't go aggressively after a kicker in this recruiting class? There wasn't a kicker or a punter selected. Punter makes sense because that's locked up for now and should be secure for the next few years. But we could potentially be having to break in a new kicker next year. Were you surprised at all that Boise State didn't try to go after, a freshman and try and develop them over this season?
Yeah, I know we have, I believe, a freshman, a redshirt freshman, possibly kickers on the roster at this time. So maybe there's some potential there for one of those guys to step up in this role. I haven't really seen them kick personally, so I can't comment on their performance thus far. But maybe, they've been doing pretty well and are kind of primed to take over that position. That might be one direction, the staff's going. Otherwise, maybe they're looking to just get a big-time recruit as a kicker next year and just take over from there. Maybe a grad transfer situation or a JUCO guy, something like that.
Well, Boise State has been showing that they are dominant in the transfer game this last season, bringing in 13, I think it was, total transfers. So Anniopoulos definitely knows how to recruit in that area, and maybe that's where they bring it in. Or like you said, maybe that's on the roster they're developing right now. Talking about someone on the roster who had a chance to step up into a role last season, it was a big part of the storyline when we were talking about this with Tyler Rousa last year, was replacing Danny Cantrell and having Mason Hutton step in there to be that long snapper for Boise State. You talked a little bit about what he did already, but how do you think he fared and developed over the season?
I think he did a great job. I mean, his primary position is snapping the football, and he did great at that. There's some development to be had in the coverage game, but he knows that. And it's hard coming from, Daniel Cantrell, who was a standout in the coverage game. He's a freak. He's a beast. So it was great having him, out there on any miss hits I had. I knew Danny was going to have my back and be able to get the guy down. So it's hard coming from someone that's so special like Daniel Cantrell and in that situation. But Mason's done a great job when it comes to being a long snapper, slinging the ball clean. And I think, working this year, hopefully this offseason, I know he's been working on things and improving that coverage aspect. I think he's going to be solid. He's a big guy. He's built well. So I think he can definitely get the job done at a high level.
Well, moving to looking at the punting game for Boise State in 2023, and we've mentioned it a little bit already, but, Ferguson going out and doing what he did, I thought he was probably one of the most improved players on the team. When you look, there's a lot of talk about Taylor Green, offensive player, star of the team. He's, of course, going to draw that spotlight. But the two players that I thought were the most improved over the year was, of course, Taylor Green, but at the end of the day, also James Ferguson Reynolds. What he did from beginning to end, what he developed into in the last half of the season, like I said, it was a slow start, almost lost his job in the Fresno State game. Bill Farron, they trotted him out and gave him a try and then brought James back. But he finished strong. I mean, I don't know if that was a motivator for him to push through and come back better. But the last 7 games, he had 11 of his 21 kicks inside the 20 in the last 7 games. His long of the season, 61 yards, was inside his last 7 games. And he had 3 games where he averaged 43 yards or more in punts. And I really thought that towards the end of the year, we were finally seeing him getting the roll on those punts, which we weren't seeing early on in the year. He was doing those Aussie style, but they were kind of just dying. But towards the end of the year, we actually saw those punts rolling and trickling down the field and getting those extra yards you get from an Aussie kick. Obviously it was a tough transition going from Aussie style play to college, American college football style. But then there's also the adjustment of going from, high school level up to college level play. Can you talk a little bit of what that transition is like? I mean, I think some people just think that you're punting a ball. It's the same regardless. Can you talk a little bit about how that transition to college is different from that high school level and what that transition for you was like?
Yeah, I mean, just the stakes are so much higher, but the preparation that you're going through is higher as well. And the staff does a great job of making sure we're prepared for whatever moment we're in. And there's just such a great culture and system for success at Boise State that I think they do a great job setting us up going into your first season. I think I felt, comfortable. My first game on the blue, kicking off through the uprights, watching the south end zone throw their hands up like it's a field goal. I just felt easy and it just happened. So I think James, I don't think he's having that much of an issue. And moving forward into this year, I think he's just even more comfortable each year, just working on improving and just getting more comfortable at the college level. It's a lot more intense, but it also becomes a lot more rewarding and more fun than the high school level.
Well, do you expect him to make a big step from his first season to his second year here for Boise State?
Definitely. I think the things I just mentioned, he's had a whole year to kind of get his feet wet, see what that college stage feels like, and then take the things that went well for him last year and keep improving on them, and then see what didn't work out and refine those things through this offseason. That's kind of the nice thing about, a seasonal sport is you have that huge window of time where you're just working hard with your brothers and working on your craft outside of that. and just trying to refine things to come back better next year. You've been through one season now, or he's been through one season now. And so I'm sure he's licking his chops to come this year and do even better.
Well, I'm super excited for him. I got to meet him in person. He's just got a great, very vibrant personality. So I'm excited for what he can do. And I was excited when he came to Boise State anyway, because I can't think back and remember the last time that we had an Aussie style kicker at Boise State. And there was just a little bit of a different element there with kind of that wild card of the extra role that you get with those Aussie style punts. And it brings a different little element to the game. So I was really excited about what his potential was. I thought towards the end of the year, he definitely was fulfilling that potential. I'm excited to see what he can do for this season, because we'll talk about it when we get to the coverage part, which is next. That punting game is going to be so key for Boise State, because they're going to face some very high potent offenses right off the gate. I mean, you've got Washington, you got to go play at their place. That's going to be tough. Then you got UCF, Boise State at home, and UCF, their powerhouse on offense last year, but they have that potential and they have a good coaching staff and they're moving up to Power 5. So you got to be able to play that field position battle, and having a strong punting game, not having any mistakes, that is going to be key and crucial for Boise State. So let's talk about that for the return and the coverage section for Boise State. And we'll start with the return. For the return for Boise State, the kick return game was fine. We'll talk about that at the end. But the punt return, I mean, I was very surprised by the fact that it was so mediocre, because that just hasn't been Boise State's way. They've always had that superstar that stepped up and has taken over for Boise State. I think Boise State was kind of looking for that superstar presence when they started going to Helani, just to see if that could kickstart things. Were you surprised at all when you saw Helani, who has dealt with some injury issues, and it was the number one running back, trotting out to return punts for Boise State? Or was that something that, Boise State puts their best guys on special teams, and so you thought it was kind of natural?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. Like you said, we take pride in special teams and we're willing to put our best players on special teams. Yeah, it didn't take me by surprise. And I think we want to, have a dynamic returner. And we've got a nice crew of guys that can all fulfill that role for sure. For whatever reason last year, I don't know if scheme-based or just effort-based. I don't think it'd be effort-based, because we typically have great effort. And I didn't, nothing stood out like crazy to me last season. I haven't broken down the film. But it probably comes down to just switching up the scheme a little bit and seeing, just what wasn't working necessarily on that punt return. Punt return team, and fine tuning it for this year, and hopefully they can come out better. We have the guys to execute at a high level, so I'm not concerned about it going into this year.
So, last year, of course, you had Caples, Cobbs, and Helani were kind of your three main guys that went out there. Caples was someone that you thought might have a chance to have a strong role this year, but unfortunately, just breaking as of the start of fall camp, he has an injury that's going to keep him out all year, which is a major loss for both offense, but also in his role potentially here in special teams, because he really kind of cemented himself as the go-to option there. And he has that little extra edge. And I thought with maybe some developments in the scheme, he would be able to exploit that a little bit more. Where do you see the return game going this year? You see Boise State maybe trying to go back to Cobbs. You obviously had that great punt return versus UTEP in 2021, which was such a long return, and it was such a huge moment for Boise State, and people thought he'd be able to put that forward in 2022, and it never worked out. Do you see Boise State maybe going again with Helani? What's really surprising is that Genty is getting some reps in there right now as well. Or do you see them maybe going with someone else like a Wright, Dudley, maybe Ladipo? There's so many options, so many ways to go with this. Where do you see Boise State potentially going in the punt return game this year?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good options. Like you mentioned, Statics, he's a beast. He's so fast and just twitchy. And we've seen him, have great returns. So I think he could be definitely in the mix. Helani, same thing. And Dudley, too, kind of doing that kick return role. I could see him transitioning to a punt return role and being successful. So that's the good thing about Boise State right now, is we have good guys available to kind of fill in. It's just finding out who meshes best with the scheme and in our system, and who's executing at practice, really. Another thing that, I didn't even think to look at until just now in the last year's punt return lull, I guess you could say, was just the other team's punt performance. I'm not sure what our opponent's punt stats were looking like, but there could be a chance that we were getting, playing against teams that had good punts against us, good hang times, and that was kind of holding us back from breaking out those bigger returns. That could certainly be a factor to look into if you really wanted to dive into what's going on from an outsider looking in.
Well, one more name we haven't mentioned for the punt return game, which I'm actually very excited about, and he has been taking reps at Boise State for the punts in this opening part of fall practice, is Chase Penry, transfer in from Colorado. He returned 6 punts while he was there and 2 kick returns, so he has some experience in that element. He's a new guy, new face. He's got some good, you talk about that twitch with static, but he's got that speed, ability, and element as well, and has a chance maybe to come in here as a newcomer and make his name known. When you're looking at the punt return game, that's always been kind of the mix of, all right, special teams is an opportunity for new guys to be able to make their name and be able to make a presence. But it's also an opportunity for your stars to be able to stand out. Where does Boise State, kind of straddle the line there? Do you see Boise State putting more of their stars into the special teams, or do you see them kind of giving those guys that are on a backup role a chance to go and succeed? Where do they end up on that side of the equation?
I think it's a bit of both, but I would say it leans more towards they're going to put guys there that are putting in the effort at practice and are truly showing that they're dedicated at wanting that role. We're going to put the best players at that position at whatever position it is. But it's going to, or one way you could stand out as a new guy coming in is just showing that you're truly dedicated and want this role and are putting in the work to be successful and essentially make the bus, is like what we like to say. You want to make those trips. You want to be on the travel squad. And so that's, one way they could separate him or separate himself coming in is showing that effort and that dedication, and the performance is going to come with it. If he's preparing the right way, he's watching film, he knows what he's doing, then on the practice field, it's going to show, it's going to be on film, and coaches are going to notice it.
Well, moving into looking at the kick return game in a very brief, before we look at the coverage overall, Dudley and Wright were kind of your main guys. Cobbs and Genty were your starters at the beginning. And then we moved towards more Wright and Dudley, and both of them looked great. Wright right now is actually limited in practice due to an injury that he's overcoming, so he's not going to get as many reps, and we're looking more here at Dudley. What did you see out of Dudley there towards the end of last season? He was very explosive. He looked great. Do you think it was Boise State's coverage finally starting to adapt as they got, or not coverage, but their return coverage adapting as they got through there towards the end of the season? Or do you think it was just that kind of explosive element that Dudley brought to the game that was different than the other returners?
Yeah, I think in the kick return game, I think people were getting their blocks, but then Dudley was just kind of hitting the holes full speed ahead, which was huge on kick return. You kind of just got to get vertical, and he was doing a good job of just staying committed to the return and just getting after it and getting some yards, even, after some contact, get a couple extra yards.
Do you see him maintaining his role as the primary starter there for Boise State in the kick return game?
I don't see why not. He's been performing well, and I'm assuming he's been continuing to do that at practice and probably wants that role. So I think he set himself up pretty well for it. But like I said, we got a lot of guys in the return game that can, be explosive and make plays.
Last time that Boise State had a kick return for a touchdown was in 2020 with Avery Williams. So it's been a little bit of a drought here. We're going on to our 3rd year without a kick return for a touchdown. From the struggles that you saw Boise State have last year and their development throughout the end of the season, do you expect Boise State to be able to get, kind of jumping ahead of ourselves predictions wise, but do you expect Boise State to be able to get a kick return for a touchdown this season?
This season, I feel like we're probably due. I think I could definitely see it happening. I think we'll have a scheme in there that'll be one that's set up for success, and I think we could get one in there for sure.
Well, we'll talk real quick here about the coverage before we move into our keys to the game and our predictions here. But the coverage was a major issue for Boise State. You look at that Mountain West Championship game, and there were a lot of different factors that led to Boise State losing that. The offense, was little stale, and it didn't move as well as it had in other games. Defense, of course, allowed some points, so I thought they played pretty well overall. But there were two absolute key moments when you look at those and you say, if those hadn't happened, Boise State could have won the game. And one was a punt return touchdown allowed. And the second was a roughing the punter, which was a bad call by the ref, but it also was a bad call to go after the punter in that situation when it was so unnecessary. Boise State was getting the ball back. It wasn't a situation where you had to go after the guy. And both of those together, the punt return for a touchdown and then the roughing the punter, which led to a first down, and then they ended up scoring a touchdown on that drive. You take away those 14 points, Boise State actually wins that game by 2. They lost 28-16. Take away those 14 points, and they end up winning that game over right there for Boise State by 2 points. So when you look at the struggles, we've talked about it a little bit already. Do you think that it was an issue of Boise State not having the right personnel, maybe not putting those stars out there on special teams like they should, or was it more of a scheme issue? And how does Boise State address that going forward this year?
Yeah, I would say it's probably a little bit of a blend. Like I mentioned, there are some new faces in there and new schemes at the same time. So there's going to be things that don't necessarily, fully make it across from the staff's plan to the players. It's going to be hard to have everything perfectly aligned when you have new guys and new schemes coming in. But I think, they've gotten the reps now, and the staff is a solid staff. They're going to know what to do to kind of refine that and make sure we're successful this year in those areas.
One element for Boise State here in the coverage game that's always been a focus for them is that Dan Paul hammer. That has been, they recently renamed the Dan Paul hammer after the passing of Dan Paul. But the hammer for Boise State, which is given traditionally to a special teams player that makes that biggest impact play, that biggest hit, that biggest energy play for Boise State. Can you talk a little bit as a player for Boise State, as a special teams player for Boise State, what that hammer symbolizes and means for the Boise State program?
I mean, that hammers everything. It just embodies the culture of a true Bronco and the brotherhood. And it's awesome to be able to honor Dan Paul running out with it. Daniel, my guy, hammer man, always carrying that hammer out, seemed like. So it was always cool to see Daniel running out with it and just being a beast and making tackles, making plays. That hammer is awesome. It's everything.
When you're a new player coming into Boise State, how quickly do you kind of embrace all these traditions and these cultures? The hammer is part of that, but of course, you've got other elements. You got the blue, you got the T-Dog. There's always, the fan base. How quickly does that soak in and the importance of what these traditions mean for Boise State? How quickly does that happen as a new player coming onto the team?
It happens fast. I mean, they do a great job through that summer bridge program of kind of explaining the history of Boise State and the traditions we've had. And, pretty quick, you're running decks with all the guys and you're sweating, you're going through it. You're a little bit miserable, but I mean, looking back, those are the best times of summer workouts with all your best friends, and just going through hard things together is incredible. And so the culture and the atmosphere at Boise State is what makes it so special. It's the way we do things at Boise State and the way we treat people in general. It's why everyone loves to be a fan of Boise State and wants to be around Boise State as much as they can.
Well, we'll talk here about keys to the game, but for Boise State, the coverage has got to be a focus for them. They've got to embrace that Dan Paul hammer spirit, which has always been an element of Boise State. I think, when you look at teams that go out and win championships, they say defenses win championships, but if you don't have solid special teams, that's going to impact every element, every level of the game, because special teams is the only unit that impacts both your scoring, your field position, impacts offense, impacts defense, impacts the whole team as a whole. Special teams, you have to have that locked up. And Boise State got one of the best kickers in school history. They got one of the best punters that they've seen here. And I think they're going to have a chance to have a strong build with him. They have some great star players who can contribute in the return game. If they can just fix this coverage issue and embrace that spirit, I think that things are going to be great for them. So we'll talk about that as far as our keys to the game. So 3 keys to the game here for Boise State. My number one is to put your stars on the coverage units. I mean, that's been part of what Boise State is. I think we have seen a little bit more of a focus on some of those newer guys, some of those guys that aren't necessarily as valuable, you don't want to lose them type players for Boise State here in the last cup, under Andy Avalos. So I think we need to start embracing that element of, when you had Tyus Young and Austin Pez, Ian Johnson on special teams, start seeing those level of players being the focus of the special teams, making it, embracing that hammer mentality, and making special teams the basis of the rest of the team is built off of. Make sure that is a focus for the team. And if it means putting some guys that are key in positions like a Hawani or a Genti into the punt return game because you need that spark, that's what you do, because if you don't get that element right, if you don't get that spark right, that is going to be the momentum swing that changes everything else in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I think as an outsider looking in, there's these kind of holes or these lower performance categories from last season that we've been able to identify, and the coaching staff is going to have those identified as well, and with even finer tooth comb than we can. And so they're going to know what they need to do coming into the season to make sure that those units are improved from last year and are successful. And I think, the staff's never been afraid of putting stars in those positions. If that's the best thing for that unit at that time, they're going to do it. And so I feel comfortable going into the season that we're going to be able to be in a good position and be successful.
Well, my second key for Boise State is to find your Dudley in the punt return game. Boise State played around with a lot of different players, and in the kick return game, and in the end, they were able to find that guy that gave them that little energy, that little spark, whether it's that same guy coming into this year for the kick return game or not. The point is, play around in the punt return game. Don't be so locked in. We got to go with this one guy. Give a lot of different guys an opportunity. There might be people that aren't showing it in practice, but you give them an opportunity in the game, and they're going to go out and surprise you. Boise State's got a good depth here. Got Cole Wright, you've got Dudley, you could try either of them. You could put Cobbs out there again, Helani gently, and I'm really excited about Chase Penry. You have a deep potential of punt returners here, in addition to other guys in the secondary that could be given a shot as well. Find your punt returner, find your Dudley in the punt return game, and start improving that element. And I think that is going to be where we see the biggest improvement for Boise State overall this season, is being able to actually focus again and move forward in the punt return game. So my second key overall is experiment, dig deep, find your Dudley in the punt return game.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And one of the challenges with that is you're not always going to get a returnable punt. And so that's the weird thing. Sometimes you will have a guy in there and just a ball's not coming, that's returnable. It's not really feasible to get a big return on this. And so maybe come the next one, he's already switched out for someone else. And it's kind of that roulette wheel, and you don't know what you're going to get. But I think that's a good strategy, get some different guys in there and just see what sparks. Hopefully they get some returnable punts this year and we can maybe run up the scores.
Well, the third and final key that I have is Ferguson needs to have a breakout year. Boise State is going to be in some very, very tight non-conference matchups. Like I said, you got to go play at Washington, UCF at home, and they also play Memphis. All of those are going to be this is similar to that 2021 season where you had so many tough non-conference games. This is similar to that. Now, luckily for Boise State, those conference games don't look to be quite as challenging as they have in the past, but that non-conference slate is going to be brutal. Boise State special teams is going to need to be able to eliminate early scores for the other team by being able to play that field position battle, especially when you have an offense that is trending towards more of a run-based offense this year that's going to be a little bit slower in their play style, because that's what Andy Avalos has been pushing for. He didn't want that, shoot it, air raid style that Tim Plow was bringing. He wanted a little bit more of a slower offense to be able to give the defense time to rest. So because of that, you're not going to have as many opportunities to score in the game. Your defense is going to be better rested, but your offense is not going to be out there scoring as quickly. So that field position battle is going to become huge. You need to limit the other team's opportunities to score. And that is all going to come down to James Ferguson Reynolds and his ability to hit the ground running, to show what he did at the end of last year, to bring that forward into this season and have a huge breakout year for Boise State. I think that if Ferguson is firing on all cylinders this year for Boise State in the punting game, I think that we are going to see a Boise State that is a major contender overall for this conference and the non-conference matchups. So to sum up here, put your stars on coverage, find Dudley in the punt return game, and Ferguson needs to have a breakout year.
Yeah, I think those are good ones. And not just necessarily Ferguson alone, but that whole unit as a whole. Because looking back at the punting game, realistically, if James hits his perfect punt, the one that he envisions himself hitting every time, there's a pretty good chance he's going to get fair caught. It's going to have good hang time, good distance. And if it's not fair caught, he probably put it somewhere real close to the sideline where the returner's not going to want to field it, and then it's just going to roll out, and we're going to get a ton of extra field position from that. So it's having that unit locked in for those slight mishits or that not perfect ball, that having that unit ready to adjust, have a nice net so we can, funnel that returner and get them down when there isn't the most perfect execution from James. I think James is going to have a great year this year, and he'll be locked in, ready to roll. And then having that scheme around that so we can execute on those slight mishits, I think the punt team can, kill it this year.
Well, moving on to predictions overall, I'm going to throw out a couple specific special teams predictions. I'm not going to put a record prediction in this video because there's a separate video coming out. I said this was the end of the 3-part series previewing Boise State football this year, but there's actually a fourth kind of a bonus to this series where I'm going to be sitting down with Jake from Master Football, and we're going to go through every single game and preview the Boise State season overall. Of course, in season, my predictions may change a little bit, but this will be my overall prediction for the year, my overall record prediction. So keep an eye out for that video with Master Football. But I'm going to throw out some predictions specific to special teams, and then I'll let you throw out any you want to throw. If you have a record prediction you want to put out as well, you're more than welcome to. But just moving to predictions here, I think we're going to see a dramatic improvement overall in coverage. I think you're right. I think that was not the Boise State way last year. Being last at anything in the FBS is not what Boise State is used to doing. And so that, I think, was a major wake-up call for Boise State. I do think that we saw improvement throughout the year, just it didn't mesh together, and I think that's been a focus over the offseason, and I think those changes are going to be made. I think that the addition of Tyler Rausa, quality control to the staff, is going to have a huge impact on that as well. I think we're going to see a dramatic improvement overall in the coverage. I think that Dudley becomes a returning game star in the kick return game. I'm not going to call a kick return touchdown this year necessarily, but I do think that he's going to get close and have some high averages in his returns overall. I think Dalmez will end up falling just 3 short of a perfect season, because I think he's going to be called on a lot to kick, and the more kicks that you have, the less opportunities you have to be able to go out and make those absolute perfect seasons overall. I do also think that he's going to be called on to kick some longer field goals, because with the offense that we have, with the ability to convert some of those shorter yardage situations with a mobile quarterback like Taylor Green, I don't think we'll see Dalmas necessarily if getting some of those shorter opportunities to kick the points. I think if we have a chance to put it in the end zone or to convert a short 4th down, we're probably going to go for it with the offense that we have. So he'll probably end up kicking a lot, and he'll end up kicking longer field goals. And so I think he'll end up just short of a perfect season, but still have a great year overall. I think that Dalmas will have a chance for that game-winning kick. I absolutely do. I could see it happening at UCF. I could see it happening in Memphis or somewhere down the line, potentially even at Washington right off the bat. I think he's going to have that chance to line up towards the end of the game, and it's all on him, and make that kick and have a chance to cement himself there in the record books. I think that Ferguson has a great year. I think he averages 42 or more yards on the season, exceeds his 2022 numbers or for punts inside the 20. And I think that Boise State has 2 special teams touchdowns, whether one is on kick return, one's on punt return. I do think there's going to be opportunities for them to find their groove in special teams and get back to those touchdowns like we're used to seeing. All right, so throw it out to you. Any predictions you want to throw out, or record prediction overall to end this video? You're good to go.
I got no predictions. I don't like to throw them out there, any jinxing, anything like that. So I'm going to abstain today.
That's absolutely understandable. Thanks so much for coming on. Before we close up, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I'm just excited for the season, and go Broncos. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. I was mentioning this before the video, but this was a fantastic, unique opportunity for the channel to be able to have Joel Velazquez on. It's the first time that a player that I've actually watched during the season and reviewed and previewed performances on this channel was able to come on and be part of the preview here for the season for Boise State. So this is also an opportunity to have you on. Make sure you guys go back and watch the offensive preview I did with Grant Hedrick and the defensive preview with Winston Venable. Both of those fantastic videos, both of those videos stacked with highlights as well, and great analysis. Also, make sure you go and watch the 10 and 10 preview that I did with Ron Counts, which is a great 10-part series, which is a lot shorter than these longer videos, but they look at the top 10 questions for Boise State football in 2023. Ron Counts also provided an article for each of those, and they're right around 10 minutes, a little bit shorter snapshots of some of the things we've discussed and going off into tracks of some things we didn't. So thanks so much for everybody for being here. Thanks so much, Joel, for coming and joining us today. This was a great discussion. It was great having you. Thanks so much for everyone for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. And as always, go Big Blue!